With over 1.8 million confirmed cases of COVID-19 worldwide, it might take years for the impact of the pandemic to play out, yet what is evident and perhaps unavoidable is a worse economic fallout since the Great Depression in the 1930s. The takeaways from world economists, central banks, financial institutions speak equally of the global recession and its lasting effects. With extended lockdowns and challenges yet to be met in the public health, it remains uncertain to predict the end game of the pandemic. Spurred by low interest rates, major shifts in the stock markets, reduced incomes followed by lower private spending and other factors big and small, the coronavirus crisis is all set to rob the global economy with a global debt of a whopping $257 trillion by the first quarter of 2020. What's more is a fear that government intervention will not be enough this time. In an ideal situation, a mild financial panic could have been dealt with the help of government policies. But from the looks of it, unless the health crisis is resolved, the downturn is unavoidable. Coronavirus-led economic fallout is causing major disruption. Coronavirus has shaken up the global consumer demand, further triggered by a negative supply shock. A combination of reduced incomes, city lockdowns followed by fear and panic has resulted in contraction in total spending, thereby a contraction in demand. Another representative agent is the unprecedented rise in global unemployment. As per the International Labour Organization, around 2.7 billion workers have been affected, with global unemployment already hitting over 190 million. Given constraints in credit and a high marginal propensity to consume, consumption of goods are dropping significantly. Reduction in labor due to lockdowns, travel restrictions, and social distancing has stemmed a negative supply shock. Further, production of goods in many countries have been affected due to the virus. Following the COVID-19 pandemic, few industries have been affected as far and as bad as the tourism industry. With the introduction of travel restrictions worldwide, a global loss of around 75 million jobs, which might further translate to a loss of $2.1 trillion, is expected by the World Travel and Tourism Council in the coming months. As per the U.S. Energy Information Administration, U.S. drivers are reported to have consumed the least gasoline in the last 3 decades. As global demand for oil drastically decreases, the industry which might follow the tourism to a close second would be the oil industry. As per Rystad Energy, the global demand for crude go down by 27 million barrels a day this month. According to a recent forecast by International Data Corporation (IDC), global spending on information technology is expected to 2.7%. While the opportunity to work remotely and collaboration prevail, challenges like unsecured home networks being vulnerable to cyber attacks are reasons to worry about. As reported by Global Data, 2020 is going to be a bad year for IT and consumer electronics. COVID-19 has also affected the hospitality industry and potentially worse than those of SARS, 9/11 attack, and the global financial crisis of 2008. With an expected loss of around $880 billion in the global airline industry, many hostels are now found empty. With huge companies being affected directly by the coronavirus, those working at the supply chains are also in bad shape. As a consequence, over 450 million people working in this sector facing unemployment now. Now coming to stocks, it might seem like a pie in the sky with some milestones like S&P 500 posting its best week since 1974, or Dow Jones having its best 5-day showing since 1988 earlier 2 weeks. A wave of bankruptcies and layoffs seem to be waiting in a corner if the virus is not contained and an efficient vaccine doesn't enter the market. Notably, for developing countries, remittances might slow down due to delayed or low payments and layoffs. In countries of the Middle East, Africa, Latin America and Asia, there will be sharp drop in the domestic consumer demand, production, and employment. Coming to the long-term effects, disruption in stocks and supply chains, shortage of supply will have negative effects in Europe and the US with changing international trade patterns. Countries like China and India will be badly affected. Trade and monetary problems emanating from first world nations like Western Europe countries and US will further affect the economies of developing countries. The extent of the damage on the global economy is partially evident and partially uncertain. In the worst-case scenario, a full-year GDP could drop to zero. Global air carriers could lose anywhere between $63 billion to $113 billion revenue by the end of this year. In lower box office sales, the international film market can suffer losses up to $5 billion. Whatever the scale of the coronavirus, there are things to worry about other than survival. While markets seem to get comforted by different stimulus programs and initiatives by governments, but the long-term benefits and losses are still foggy. For a detailed case study on how COVID-19 has affected the global economy, please visit the link shared in the description below.